itself, when they found it, they said, "Oh, let's just move it over there because we're going to build the Ramses Museum." So the engineers came and they said, "Well, okay, but then we'll have to cut it in pieces because this thing is approximately 1,000-ton solid block of granite. 1,000 ton. That is 5 times more than what we can lift today with a land crane." So instead they built a museum around it. This is not the only 1,000-ton block that was found. The pillars on each side of the entrance of temples in Egypt, they are called obelisks. Many of them were in excess of 1,000 tons. And they all come out, all these large objects come out of a quarry that we know where it is. It's hundreds of miles up the Nile. And the quarry is on the other side of the Nile over a mountain range. Okay? When you ask archaeologists, how did this get there? They say, they cut a trench from the Nile across the mountain range into the quarry. And then they let the water in, and then they picked up the object, they stuck it on a barge, and they floated it down the Nile. But there's no evidence of that trench ever being cut. How do you lift up 1,000-ton object and put it on a barge without sinking it? I mean, that is just not appropriate. It just doesn't happen. So when you look at this, you start to wonder, who were these sun gods? And were they able to go all around the world? Under the water in Japan, recently, pyramids were found. These pyramids are at 19.47 latitude. They're enormous pyramids. All the fishermen knew that they were there, but they didn't think it was important, so they didn't tell anybody. And here is another picture of these slabs. They're huge. They're huge blocks. What's really interesting about those is that, you see, you can't date a pyramid. You can't date a monument because carbon dating only carbon dates. You need carbon. Rock doesn't have much carbon in it, not enough to date it. It has silica, and it has, it has a certain rate of decay and all this. You can date how old is the rock, but that won't tell you when it was cut and assembled into a pyramid. Okay? So actually, archaeologists don't date the monuments. They just find the bones of this poor fellow beside it, or they find a fireplace beside it or something, and then they carbon date that. And they say, oh, it's this dude that built this thing. You see? But when the pyramid goes under the water, now coral growth starts to happen shortly after. And that's carbon datable. So now you can tell at least when the pyramid went under the water. Well, when they carbon dated these pyramids, they went under the water at least 10,000 years ago. The meltdown of the last ice age, when the water rose and covered the earth. There is over 500 flood stories in ancient civilization all around the world, talking about an advanced civilization that was there prior the sun god, and the flooding that occurred that destroyed most of that civilization. Here we might be seeing some of the vestiges of that civilization. Go ahead.
Well, Edgar Casey came up with
by finding a wall or a road, and we did. And he said it was going to be in the early 70s, and in 1973, I believe, divers off the coast of Bimini found huge rocks under the water, making a road. And Edgar Casey said we were going to find a chamber under the paws of the Sphinx. And recently, using
side-looking radar?
yeah, I'm sorry.
Side-looking radar?
Yeah, it's actually seismic reverberation waveform. They were able to look under the paws of the Sphinx, and they found a chamber there. And they say they haven't got into it yet. That's a whole other story. But anyway, these pyramids were found in Egypt. And these ones are datable to 10,000 years. Check out this picture. This was taken during the Second World War by an American pilot that was lost over China. And he saw this pyramid, and he took a picture, and he brought it back home. He survived the whole thing and brought the picture back home. And everybody, you know, a few years ago when I would present that, people would say, oh, well, that one's iffy, you know. This could be a hoax. Well, okay, nobody believed him, except that the Chinese government in the last few years have released these pictures. Not only is there more, there's pyramids in Egypt, there's hundreds of pyramids in Egypt, in China. And the Chinese government actually got the farmers to farm on top of the pyramids so that they wouldn't be so apparent by satellite. And the reason why, so here's the poor farmer that got the job. The reason why they were doing that is because they didn't want the Western world to know about these pyramids. Why? Because the legends that comes with these pyramids is that the sun gods built them, and that the sun gods were blue-eyed, blonde-haired people. As far as the Chinese government looked at this, blonde-haired, blue-eyed people had to be Europeans. And the last thing they wanted was European people being responsible for some of the most ancient knowledge of the Chinese tradition. So they didn't want those pyramids to be known by the West. They did find the mummies of these blonde-haired, blue-eyed people in the high desert of China. Over 500 mummies were found. All very tall, absolutely not Asian people. And then you go to the forbidden city of China, the city that holds all the knowledge of the universe, all the knowledge of the sun gods. And at the entrance of the city is the Sphinx, the lion, which in both Egypt and Chinese tradition are the guardian of the knowledge. They guard the knowledge under their paws. And when you look closely at the paw, what do you find? A spherical intersecting pattern of the flower of life, which generates 64 tetrahedron grid. Guardian of the knowledge. Fairly old, but this section of China was largely rebuilt and fairly recent, But it's all coming from very ancient tradition that's passed on orally throughout the ages. And that's why you find still the knowledge being present. Although the knowledge of the sun gods has been very, very confused and diluted throughout the ages. So when you go further into the Chinese tradition, what do you find? The I Ching. How many I Ching symbol is there? 64. And remember now, the yin and the yang we saw is a double torus. You'd be missing the geometry of the vacuum in the middle of singularity. But the 64 symbols of the I Ching gives you this. How? When I found this, I thought, oh, this is so sweet. It took me weeks, took me months to actually figure it out. I knew there was 64 symbols, but what did the symbols say? The symbols typically are arranged in a circle, the 64 symbols. Can you turn off your light a little bit so maybe you can see the symbols? Maybe not. They're here. There's 64 of them. And each of them are actually composed of full sticks and broken sticks. And each of the symbols are in opposition. So like 1 and 64, 2 and 63, they're all in opposition. And I realized, wait a minute, if you take 6 stick, you put them in 3D space, which geometry would you get?
Tetrahedron.
A tetrahedron. That's the only geometry you can generate out of 6 sticks. But then why the broken sticks? Well, if you're following the code of the I Ching that tells you the sticks are in opposition, then you're going to need broken sticks. Watch this. Boom, 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 boom. You see? You need broken sticks to do the polar opposite of the tetrahedron. They have to be broken because the sticks intersect.
Could you do that again with the light off to the computers?
Okay.
Yeah, we don't need lights, period.
Well, the video
The video
does.
does, so you can see.
Boom, boom. Can everybody see this? You need a broken stick to go in between the other sticks to generate the opposite polar structure, which is given by the code itself. Isn't that sweet? And so you take the code, and I didn't have time